Haha, you did it. Excellent. All right. Well, let's go ahead and kick this off. So, Holly, tell us about you. Tell us about EdTech.
Oh, that's a great question to start off with. I started actually we have the 1 year anniversary on Friday of the show. So Ed
Congratulations.
Up
Happy
Ed
anniversary.
Tech, thank you. Ed Up Ed Tech started out of an idea I had in talking to Alvin Frites and Joe Solucio at the Ed Up Experience. I said maybe we should do a podcast about educational technology and get all the latest and greatest people who are doing awesome things in educational tech on the show and to talk about what they're doing because there are so many great things happening in ed tech and a lot of money and things being infused into that industry. So that's what the show's about. We talk to people from institutions, we talk to vendors, we talk to a lot of different people, instructional designers, and we just have a good time. And it's been growing. So it's quite the following since I started it last year, and I'm really excited to some of the people that we have coming up soon.
Do you want to drop any hints, like sneak peeks?
So sneak peeks, let's say we have an author coming up. We
Oh,
we have an institution coming up, somebody from a director of instructional technology that's going to talk about what they do at their institution. We have some great like vendors who are doing some things around student security and safety and like
mm.
mental health. So that's some stuff. Now tell me about your stuff,
Okay,
Betty.
yeah, sure. Hi guys, Betty Dannewitz. I think you know me. Uh, Probably as If You Ask Betty, from the If You Ask Betty podcast. Also, my day job, just so you know, is I work for the Ken Blanchard Company because I mean, why not work for a company that's trying to make a difference in the world when you're trying to make a difference in the world? So there we go. If You Ask Betty is, all kinds of development topics for all kinds of learning professionals. So several folks that are on this panel have been on the podcast, or if they haven't, they're going to be. And so I like to get in and have conversations about all different things around learning and development. And sometimes it's about stuff that we may not directly see a correlation, but we find the correlation. My favorite sort of package of podcasts that I've got a chance to do is, I don't know if you guys have seen the Loki episodes. Anybody listened in? There's 5 episodes about how Loki is every learner. Had so much fun doing those. Especially I think the best one was probably Glorious Purpose. It was me and 3 dudes, and it was the longest podcast I've ever recorded. It's like an hour and 35 minutes, and it was all them. Like I barely got a word in edgewise. They were all so geeked to talk about Glorious Purpose, and I'm like, if your wives could see you now, seriously, because you're sharing all your feelings on this podcast, and they want them. Anyways, moving on. So super excited that we're going to be hosting this today. Before we get right into the panel, we got a couple of things we want to cover. First, special thanks to Heidi Ranganathan. Everybody say hi, Heidi. Thank you so much for giving of your time to be the producer today so that we can just focus in and ask questions and answer questions and have a good time. Appreciate that. Also have special thanks for, I'm totally taking your
It's
slide,
fine.
Holly.
Just keep
I'm just
going.
excited. Okay.
I know.
For Alex Casillas, who built all of the social media marketing. So we had put out a call and said, hey, we want to be able to lift you up and show folks that you have great talent. And so he answered the call to that. So he did all of the beautiful marketing, social media. And then Ann Gherkin as well. She helped to write some of the social media posts and some of the other things. So really appreciate their help with all of that. And with that, let's talk about panelists. Go ahead, Holly.
Yeah, I am so excited and have the distinct honor of talking about our panelists and having them introduce themselves. Unfortunately, Heidi and Anna can join us, but we do want to shout them out because they are amazing podcast hosts and they're doing wonderful things in the L&D community. So please go follow them, listen to their shows, connect with them on LinkedIn. But I'm happy to introduce to you, we have Carolyn Kiel from Beyond 6 Seconds. So Caroline, tell us about you and your show. Don't give away too much. We have some specific questions, but give us a little bit.
Absolutely. So as you said, my name is Carolyn Kiel. I work in learning and development as my day job for a large telecom company where I work on, I'm an instructional designer for learning related to our new products and promotions. And my podcast is separate from my regular work in L&D, but it is called Beyond 6 Seconds. And it goes and shares the extraordinary stories of everyday people. And this year I have a focus on neurodiversity.
Excellent.
So
And
cool.
we're so glad you're here and you could join us. And I've listened to a couple episodes and I have to say it's very awesome. And speaking of awesome, we have That's Awesome ID host Leslie Early with us. And I'm a huge fan of her show too. So Leslie, tell us about you and your show.
Yeah, so That's Awesome ID is really, I just reach out to people that I know in my network or maybe extended network or people I see who are sharing thoughts and ideas about different things in ID, and really just ask them to have a conversation with me about one thing they think is awesome in the field of instructional design, or really sometimes we get to things that are a bit tangentially related, but in that general vein. And this concept came from me just being a big fan of Jonathan Van Ness's Getting Curious podcast, and
oh my
it's
gosh,
kind of my muse for. I mean, I can't claim to be as awesome as Jonathan Van Ness, but that he was my muse as to why I chose to take this approach to the podcast.
Well, you're definitely getting there. So don't sell yourself short of that. So thank you both for being here today. We can't wait to ask you questions and you to share all your experiences with the audience that we have present. And also, this is recorded, so you can go back and check out all this wonderful information that we are sharing.
And let me also throw in that even though Anna and Heidi couldn't be here, they did participate in sort of the prep for this. So we will have, you're going to find out towards the end, but I'm just going to preview it for you now. We will be doing a publication with all of their answers so that you can sort of reference back and take a look at it or share it with others. And it will include Anna and Heidi's answers to these questions as well.
Yes, they're definitely a huge part of this initiative that we decided to do. And I also want to say that we have, and this was Caroline's idea, that we have asked people to please donate, and we're highlighting She's the First. It's an organization that helps, a nonprofit organization that helps women across the world get educational opportunities that otherwise are not afforded to them. So please, if you can donate, we'll be talking more about this throughout the program, but also you can go right now and donate to this wonderful organization.
All right. So now for the questions. Are you ready? I wish we had some music. We tried to make music happen. Betty's not so good on the fly with music. So yeah, we're going to just go ahead. First question would be, is this you or me? This is you. I'll shut up.
No, why don't you just go, Charlie?
Get so excited. I'm so sorry. This is what happens when you have a room full of hosts. That's what happens.
Yeah.
Tell us about your podcast and how you got into podcasting. Go ahead, Carolyn, you're already unmuted.
Sure. So again, my podcast is called Beyond 6 Seconds, and the 6 seconds concept goes beyond this sort of 6-second first impression that, it's kind of a statistic. Don't know how scientific it is, but it was cool for a name. So a lot of times we make impressions in the first 6 seconds, whether it's meeting someone new or just trying to get like a sound bite to get our attention. I want to go beyond that in order to share a lot of extraordinary stories from everyday people who we don't normally get to hear from, either on social media or just out in the world. Because I started it because I was meeting a lot of really interesting people, a lot of times through LinkedIn. I got a lot of my first guests from LinkedIn for people I was connecting with and just having sort of one-on-one DM conversations and learning about all these really interesting and fascinating projects they were working on, whether it was related to their career or a particular volunteer initiative that they were leading or a passion project or a hobby. So I wanted to get into podcasting and said, I would just love to elevate a lot of these stories and share a lot of the good and really exciting things that people are passionate about and great things that they're doing out in the world. So I've been podcasting for just about 4 years now. I started in January 2018, and I've had a whole variety of guests over the years. It was kind of a very general open call, basically any kinds of stories from any types of industries that interest me and I thought would interest my listeners. So I've had many guests from the worlds of business and technology, nonprofits, even arts and entertainment, and even a few, sort of celebrities and heroes of mine that have been excited, have actually been able to get on the show, which has just been so awesome to have one-on-one conversations with them. So again, it's interview based. So almost every episode I'm interviewing one guest, and mainly about their personal stories, what challenges they faced, what great achievements they've had. And I really try to keep a balance of, not just showing all the great side, but not necessarily showing all like the challenging side, just trying to keep it real, I guess, as they say, and just be very realistic about what it takes in order to execute on your passion and really do a lot of great things in the world. And yeah, I mean, I have, as I said, had a really broad focus for my show over the past 4 years. This year, now in 2022, I've refined the focus of my podcast to feature more guests who are themselves neurodivergent. So neurodivergence is, conditions like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, Tourette syndrome, and a whole host of other sort of neurotypes, as they say. I was late last year. I was recently discovered I was neurodivergent myself. So this is a way for me to learn about just different people like me. And just it's been so rewarding to have these conversations just with people about, again, the same types of things, their life experiences. And one great thing about podcasting I found is, it doesn't matter how long you've been podcasting with your show, you can adjust and change the direction of your show over time and just learn, see what works for you, what works for your audience. And because it's your show, so you get to control, the direction that it goes in.
That's right. You want to drop any of those celebrity names? I mean,
sure. So I
want to know. So.
I know,
Okay.
me too. I was just going to ask the same thing.
So the very first quote unquote celebrity that I interviewed actually reached out to me like years ago. And it was kind of shocking because I had an Instagram account and was building it at the time. And someone started following me with like a blue check mark. I'm like, oh, blue check mark. Who is this? But I didn't recognize the name right away. But her name was Samantha Hammock, I believe. And I'm forgetting, so many years ago, but she was the former co-star on our co-host of Dancing with the Stars. She's also an entertainment journalist. So you've probably seen her. She's been like on TV all the time, hosting major shows. And, now she came on my podcast. I connected with her after, obviously she connected with me and invited her on the show. So she came on the show to talk about her cancer journey, because at a relatively young age, without a lot of family history, she was diagnosed with cancer. And she talks about how she managed through that with her family and how she sort of started looking at her diet and sort of everything in her environment and doing a lot of research and to see what works for her. And she had a book out. And so that's mainly what she's doing now, is a lot of like consulting and writing books about that. So we talked about that. We talked a little bit about TV and being in the media, being in a public eye and going through a health challenge like that. So she was the first one.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was fun. And also I interviewed Carly Fiorina, who was, she ran for president a couple of years ago, but she's really mainly known for being, I think, the first female CEO of a Fortune 500 company, actually maybe a Fortune 50 company, Hewlett Packard. So she runs a leadership company now. I actually went to meet her at a book signing and asked her to be on my show at that point. And then she came on, so we made it happen. And she was just great because she has so many stories that she's written about growing up and being in a career where she was trying to be a leader at a time that women really weren't leaders in the corporate world many years ago. So a lot of interesting stories came out of that. So and I interviewed John Heffron. He's one of my favorite stand-up comedians. So those are just some of the celebrities that I've talked to.
So John Heffron he's from this area. He's from Detroit. He's from my area.
That's right. He's from Michigan. Exactly.
Yes, I saw him locally and like laughed till I was in tears. Yeah, he's fantastic.
Yeah, we've just been, my husband and I are big fans of his since he was on Last Comic Standing, and he's just been doing it for years and years. And yeah, he's so funny. We enjoy his work.
That's really
cool. Great.
That's cool. All right, Leslie, you're up.
Yeah, wow, that's really amazing, Carolyn, hearing about your motivation and your experience and that you've been doing it for so long. Those are life goals. So yeah, how my podcast, That's Awesome ID. Basically, I started this in 2020 because I was trying to break into, trying to transition from being an educator into instructional design, and I had even gone back to school for it, and um, decided to get a master's degree. I know not everybody does that, and I don't think everybody has to do that, but that was the route that I took. And as part of that class, they asked us to come up with a strategy for how are we going to network, and how are we going to use LinkedIn. And I was like, well, how can I post content or have a regular content schedule? And also, because I have some experience with audio recording, my undergrad was in audio radio, so I knew I could make a podcast, and that would be a lower barrier to entry for me personally, because I already had the technical skills to do it, as opposed to starting a vlog or a blog or something. That really, I was just trying to find a way to make content that I could post, and also a way to network. So coming up with a podcast, it sort of gave me an official way to reach out to people who maybe I would think were intimidating otherwise. But still have my official one pager that sort of explains what the podcast is, what type of guest I would want. And so having that, I felt much more comfortable using this as a pretense to, reach out to people and say, hey, I like the post you talk about this topic. It's really interesting. Would you like to come be a guest on my podcast? And then that gave me a chance to continue to meet new people and learn from people that I admired or respected in our industry. And that's kind of where it started. So started out with some selfish, I guess, motivations, but as I've gone along, it's become much bigger than that, because the response has been great. People seem to really enjoy the show. I get, it seems to be helping others. So by going through those conversations and recording them, they're now documented so other people can learn from them too. And it's been such a positive experience, and had such a positive impact on my life that I think it's one of the best things I've ever done for myself as far as, professional development and personal growth.
Very cool. And I think your podcast could probably have an alternate name. So yours is That's Awesome ID, right? It could probably be called The Podcaster in the Closet. Right.
I moved out of the closet. So
oh, you did? Oh, okay.
Yeah. I got a
Okay.
different microphone that is not, it's a cardioid mic. So it's not picking up the whole room sound like the
That's
one that
funny.
I had before.
That's
So
pretty funny.
yes, I sit right here now, and I do
Oh,
it
good.
all
Okay.
right
Okay.
here. So
Yeah. Well, that was fun. When we did my episode, like all of your coats were hanging behind you. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Definitely.
That's kind of.
I was definitely in the closet for the entire first season, and only like maybe by the second episode of the second season,
Yeah.
I was like, I gotta grow up and figure out a different solution here. Yeah.
Well, the next question was going to be, why do you keep podcasting? But you both kind of already answered it. It sounds like when you got started, it really sort of ignited a passion in you that you may or may not have even known that you had. Anything else that you would add on top of that? No?
I mean, I can jump in if I'm unmuted already, Carolyn, if
Yeah.
you don't mind. Yeah, why do I keep podcasting? Well, I suppose, yeah, like I just said, it's become a much bigger thing. I think maybe at this point in my career, I don't necessarily have the same goals with it. I feel relatively secure in the current position I'm in. I feel really good about the network that I already have. So those goals have become secondary, and now it's more just like about sharing with the community. Continuing to provide a platform for other people. I really enjoy providing a platform for people who maybe aren't, big names in the industry or in the community, but do have something that they want to share. And so, I would like to hear about it and give them the opportunity to share that with the rest of the community, and just sort of, providing that space and yeah, it's kind of become my way of like giving back, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I relate to that as well. It's definitely a give back. I love providing a platform for people who normally may not have a platform to share their own stories, and just being able to help them share like that. And I continue doing it for me, honestly, because it's fun. Like I've always thought in my head, as soon as this isn't fun for me, because this isn't a business, it really is a hobby in addition to my day job. So as soon as it's not fun anymore, like I'm either changing it or I'll stop. So fortunately, after 4 years, it's still fun.
That's good to hear.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Definitely. Since coming up on the year mark here for me. And a lot of what you all said really resonated with me, in the fact that we're doing it to get people's stories out there. Cause I always tell my guests when they come on, I'm like, this is a conversation. This isn't anything that's too structured. You just need to share about you. And one of the first questions we ask is, tell us your story, how you got in this industry. And I think that's one of the reasons I started it. And like Carolyn said, it's a hobby until it's not fun anymore. And I think I do it after work. So I record in the evening. So it really is something that I'm so interested in. And I get to network with those people and also get to learn about their stories. And we develop these friendships. So it's really awesome what you're both doing. So the next question that we have, and we'll start with Leslie this time. Well, either one of you can pop in. What do you find is the biggest challenge to being a woman podcaster? So Caroline, you can pick. So I'll say Caroline, let's start with you and then we'll go to Leslie.
Okay. Yeah, so I think honestly, right now, most of my challenges are related mainly to being an indie podcaster. So those of you who've been podcasting, I think I started podcasting before like all the big name celebrities discovered podcasting, like it was some new thing. I mean, it's been around way before I even started.
Long time.
Yeah, so the dynamic has changed. So now it's even harder than ever to kind of get attention or wide attention. So yeah, I think a lot of the challenge is just, how to grow my audience, while sort of scaling my podcast process, so I can kind of balance time, cost, and quality. Because again, it is something that I do outside of work. So yeah, that's sort of the biggest challenge around that. And I don't know. I mean, I really hate to give this answer. It's like, I don't know that I've encountered significant challenges directly related to being a woman podcaster. But one thing I have noticed is that and I'll have to make it apparent why I consider this an issue, is that a lot of times I get a lot of compliments about my speaking voice. And I'm also a singer. So part of that, I'm sure, is like the singing training that kind of comes into vocally, and people like my recorded voice. I'm actually kind of okay with listening to myself on recording, which I know a lot of people aren't. I just have done it so much. And in terms of why that's a challenge, is a lot of time that compliment is followed or delivered along with negative comparisons and stereotypes about other women's voices. So it's like, you're so great, because most women's voices sound like, blah, 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 not good things. So it's like, all right. So it's sort of a challenge. It's something that kind of annoys me, because it's actually made me a lot more aware of how women's voices in general, not just in podcasting, are judged more harshly and unfavorably than men's voices in terms of everything: pitch, tone, upspeak, vocal fry. Men do those things. Nobody notices. Women get picked on for it. So I'm happy that people enjoy listening to my voice, but I'm trying to use my voice to help amplify other people's voices and stories on my podcast, no matter how they speak or what they sound like.
Yeah. It's like all of it, especially like if you have like a deeper voice, or, people say sometimes like your voice is very soothing to me. And, as much as I appreciate the compliments and stuff, and, talking about like, well, I've listened to other shows, and like you're saying, is they're kind of, giving them a bad rap when they're saying like these other people who don't have good voices. But that's really great. That you haven't encountered too many challenges when it comes to that. Obviously, getting followers and listeners is a huge challenge when you're a one woman show. So Leslie, tell us what has been your biggest challenge as being a woman podcaster.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Carolyn. It's funny you put your finger on the pulse of one of my insecurities about actually my own show. It's like sometimes when I get super excited, I know my voice just goes whoop, like straight up super shrill. So when I'm editing myself, I may notice something like that, but at this point I'm just like, oh well, who cares? Like if you don't like it, you don't like it, and you don't listen. But yeah, it's it's sort of a backwards compliment when someone says something like to you, and yeah, doesn't make anybody feel good, maybe except that person who said it. And yes, so what is my biggest challenge being a woman podcaster? Let me preface my answer by saying this is a very, very small percentage of my experience actually, in my podcast. I have occasionally run into either, and very occasionally, someone, either a guest or a potential guest, like when I'm doing the outreach process, where I feel slightly not taken very seriously, or talked down to, or something along, a little bit condescended to. So that, and I can't say for sure that really has anything to do with me being a woman, or if that has to do more with the other person. You can never
Might be their
really know in that
personality.
situation. Yeah,
Like
exactly.
that might just be how they are.
You can't know, but there's always sort of this, when I'm in those types of situations, like there is a sneaking suspicion in the back of my mind that, if I was not a woman, perhaps this interaction would be going a different way. And that's really the only challenge that I can really think that I can attribute to being a woman. All other challenges are just what everybody would expect. How do you grow your audience? How do you find enough time in your free time to get it all done? How do you source guests? Those things are not necessarily connected to being a woman, but just sometimes uncomfortable interactions, maybe.
I really liked how Carolyn put it in. I'm going to try to say it. I'm going to butcher it. You said, how am I balancing my time, energy, and something? You said three things.
Costs
and cost.
Quality.
Yeah.
Cost.
Yep. Time, quality, and cost. Is that what you said?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and that's super important because, not just everybody has other things that they're doing, but as women, I feel like sometimes we tend to I feel like we have more. I just feel like we are, and maybe I'm alone. Maybe it's just me and Holly. I don't know. But
You're not alone.
We're taking care of not only our close circle, but we tend to be involved in the care of others that are even in our extended circle. And not that doesn't happen with men, but it almost always happens with women. And I think that finding that balance, and deciding when, is it worth my time to spend the time editing, or is it better for me to pay for someone else to do that for me? Like, you have to find that balance. And I know for me, there are times when I pay for editing, and I'm so grateful for the folks that say, yeah, sure, I'll do that. And there are times when I do it myself, and I love it. Don't get me wrong. I love it. But sometimes other things have to take priority. And so you have to say, okay, does that mean I slow my roll as far as how many episodes I'm producing on a regular basis, which is okay if that's the decision that you make, or do you call in for reinforcements? So, yeah, so I love what you both had to say there. And I think we could talk about this for the rest of the time. I think
this would take up the rest of the session. And I think this is really something we do for ourselves, because this is something we're passionate about. So that's really why I want to start it. I've loved ed tech since I can remember, since I started teaching in 2007. So it's really something to do for myself. So it's like podcasting is kind of like self-care to me. It's fun and exciting. So that's why I do it. Yeah.
And I do see that we have lots of questions that are coming through, and then folks are answering. I love that. I love what's happening in the chat. Keep them coming. We're going to answer a few more of our sort of pre-prepared questions, and then we'll switch over and answer some of those, because I have a feeling that some of them might get answered in the next couple questions, maybe. So let's go to this next one, which is, what is your process for podcasting, and how does that process impact your work-life balance? Leslie is smiling ear to ear. She has thoughts and feelings about this, I can tell. Go ahead, Carolyn, you're already unmuted.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yep, I can go next. So, I've got a lot of different steps, and I actually created my own workflow, sort of a basic one, like in Microsoft Excel, with all the different steps so that I can keep track of everything that goes on. But in terms of the main steps I take, it's, first finding and scheduling the guest is sort of its big step in its own. Then I do preparation for the interview, whether I always do some level of guest research, getting guest bios, headshots ahead of time, et cetera, that I can use for the podcast itself and for social media promotion when the episode comes out. Obviously recording the episode, then editing. I know sometimes I do my own editing and other times I'll get help doing that. Again, as we were talking about earlier, it really is a balance for that. Writing the show notes, designing social media marketing collateral, things like audiograms, which are like the little videos that like little video clips, and it plays a little clip from that, graphics that have quotes from the interview from my guest. And a lot of times I'll send that to my guest to make it easier for them to share the episode if they want to. And I do get some help with those as well, because it can be a lot if it's just one person doing all that. I do transcripts now. I've been trying to do that for the past like year or two, because I want to be more inclusive. And if people don't want to listen to the audio of a show or don't want to watch it on YouTube, they can just read through the transcript, and helps with SEO as well. So those two reasons. Upload, and then of course uploading the episode and then promoting it. Like half the time I go through all the steps and I'm like, oh yeah, I have to actually promote the episode that I made with all the stuff that I prepared. So
you're like, I've already done a lot of work. What's
I know, I'm like,
left?
I feel like I'm done. I'm on to the next episode. It's like, oh no, this actually has to come out now and you have to promote it. So it can be very time consuming. So that's why I release episodes every other week for the most part. I try doing every week. It's just way too much for me for the rest of my life. But every other week is what I do.
It's a lot. If you do everything that you just described, it's at least 8 hours of work. And that's based on a 30-minute podcast. Yeah, that's at least 8 hours of work, especially the transcribing, because even though we have great stuff, great apps out there like Descript, you still have to be involved in that. Like it's not perfect. You still have to go back through it and read through it and make sure that it makes sense. Although Descript does help a lot. Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and give my thoughts for a second, Leslie. I follow a similar process. I think I probably skip about every second or third step that you take, Carolyn. I skip some of those things. Like I don't do show notes, and I probably should. I've dabbled in transcripts, but it takes so much time.
It does.
And so I have found that for me, my process is a little less, but it's largely because I produce less. And I don't know that there's a right or a wrong with that. I have a deep desire to make it more accessible. I just don't have the bandwidth to do it. And maybe that's an excuse. I don't know. I feel a little bit convicted about it because you're doing transcripts, but it's just, I just don't have the time. So I just don't do it. So that sometimes I think that's how it impacts work-life balance is I choose life over the extras that I could be doing for podcasting. So what about you, Leslie?
Yeah, I think my production cycle is very similar. Initial guest outreach, I find the most frustrating part of it is the initial guest outreach. If I don't have someone in mind, or trying to line up getting the recordings done in time to meet your production schedule, or there's postponements, and so you think you're doing about recording one a week, but that if the first one gets postponed, then all of a sudden you have a week where you're like, oh shoot, I'm recording 3 episodes. Like that's a lot to do in 1 week, so it just kind of getting that cycle is the most stressful for me personally. But once I also add an extra step. I don't know if you do this, Carolyn, or if you just do research on your own, but I've learned over the course of my first season, I've added an extra pre-interview before going into recording, because I find that depending on who I'm interviewing, and I mentioned before, I like to spotlight people who maybe don't have a lot of public speaking experience and maybe aren't as familiar, or maybe don't have those canned responses ready to go. So that pre-interview, which is another meeting on top of just the regular recording, where I really just guide my guests through that process of like, this is what you can expect. Tell me what you know about this topic. And then by the end of that 30-minute call, essentially have a list of interview questions for them that they are aware of, that I email to them so they know and they feel prepared. That strategy doesn't always work. Sometimes it backfires. Some people get over prepared and then, then they feel really tense and uncomfortable in the recording session. So, you have to adapt to who your guest is. But
Yeah.
So that extra step really, but I think it pays off, because then once I get into the recording goes smoothly. It's much easier to edit because there's not a lot of stops and retakes and let me try that again. And then, yeah, once I can do the editing pretty quickly on my own. I upload it to get the transcript going. I use Otter AI for that.
Otter.ai, yeah.
I don't heavily edit my transcripts for the reasons you just mentioned, Betty. It takes forever. So my solution, which is like a really cop-out solution, is when I go to I edit about the first paragraph to make sure I have at least the guest's name correct. And if they have like other media, like if they have a podcast or a YouTube channel or a book, make sure all of that information is correct. But after that, I post it on my website with a little disclaimer at the top that says this transcript was auto-generated and may contain errors. And that's it, because like I can't be bothered to edit
it's a lot.
thing.
It's a deep dive into some detail. Yeah.
Yeah. And I did don't want to take too much more time, but someone asked in the chat how to get it from just your recording to actually getting it out for people to hear. And there's actually a lot of good services, free services available. I use Anchor to do that. So once you have your Anchor account and you have your edited recording, you really just upload it to Anchor, and Anchor will distribute that to all the major places. So like it goes to Apple, it goes to Google Play, it goes to Spotify. There might be some obscure podcast platforms that if you really wanted to be on, you would have to distribute that separately, but for the most part it takes care of the big ones. So actually it's really not that hard. It's a lot easier than I think people think it is to get it out to all the major platforms.
Yeah definitely. And the transcripts is something I'm working on too. So I saw some people had some advice in the chat about using like ASR through YouTube and different recognition softwares to just get that transcript to copy it in. But that's definitely something I want to work on, like you said, to be more inclusive. And you both, and then the next question we had was about how do you source topics and guests, but both of you have really touched on this quite a bit, in that you do some pre-interviewing, you kind of come up with your topics, or you already have set information that you want to talk about on the show. But is there anything you want to add before we move on to the next question, which has to do with some marketing? Anything either of you want to add to that, or Betty too?
I mean, I have something while you guys were thinking about it. So if you're like me and tend to be social, flitting about as if you are a butterfly, especially when I go to like in-person events, which of course we didn't have too many, and then now we've had a few. I try to pay attention to the things that interest me when I hear people talking. And then immediately I've sort of developed this boldness where I just go up to them and I introduce myself and I said, "Hi, I'm Betty Dannewitz. I have a podcast called The If You Ask Betty. Love to have you on the podcast to talk about what you just talked about." And I've never had anybody say, "No, I don't do podcasts." Now, I have had them say yes and then not respond to my email that requests that they set up a time, but that's fine. Like my business development step is to introduce myself, ask them if they'd like to be on the podcast, tell them that I think they could add value. That's my job. Their job is to respond. If they don't respond, then hey, that's okay. I'm going to ask the next person as well. I'm not going to lie. I have totally cannibalized my circle of friends full on. And some of them more than once or twice, but it's because they have interesting things to say. So it's really about finding the thing, like listening for the conversations that are happening that your listeners would want to hear, and then just saying, "Hey, I would love to have you on the podcast." People want to be on the podcast, so that's kind of my sourcing of guests.
I would jump in and oh, sorry, Carolyn.
No, go ahead.
I would just jump in and say I've done the same thing. And for people who are, at the very beginning and trying to think, I really like I said, I started this when I was brand new to instructional design, and I really did start just asking people that I knew that were really just my friends, that were not well known in the community, but that I knew them and I sort of knew their interests. And so I could kind of guess what they would like to talk about. Or not. I really would just ask a friend, hey, you want to be on my podcast? And then we kind of hammered out what to talk about. That has sort of evolved now, where I do feel more comfortable approaching people that I am not super familiar with. I kind of do what you do now, Betty, where I'm paying attention when I'm in other settings. I've started to cannibalize Pact, which is a local Minnesota. Yeah. And I just in those
just go through the
networking
roster.
sessions,
Yeah.
I just go, hey, you want to be on the podcast? I think I've had 3 people now from Pact who have been on my podcast. So I will say I still am not that brave about reaching out to people. The biggest name that I reached out to completely cold, not knowing anything about it, or not knowing him at all, and not really realizing how big of a name he was Tim Slade.
Yeah.
And that was at the very beginning of, I was so naive, and I was just
he's a big deal.
He's a huge deal.
Yeah, he's a big deal.
I asked him, I just sent him a message on LinkedIn because I saw he had post a new version of his e-learning designer's handbook, and I was like, oh, hey, you have this book, do you want to come promote it? Not knowing who he was. And when he said yes, I was like, okay, great. And then only after the fact did I slowly start to realize, oh my God, why did this person even take me seriously or say yes to me at all? But
because he's wonderful, because he's such a good guy.
He's so down to earth
person. Yes.
Yeah.
So but I don't do that very often. I don't approach people that I'm that I have no personal connection to, or even second degree, degree of separation, because people are busy and they have and they don't know me from Adam. So why would they? So I'm pretty selective about who I choose, but mostly just friends and acquaintances.
Well, sometimes people become podcast guests and then they become friends and acquaintances. Dan Hurt, I mentioned him earlier. He was my second podcast guest, number 2. And I mean, we do all kinds of stuff together around podcasting now. So you never know, plus he's from Canada. I mean, Canadians are really nice people. At least that's what Americans think. And he seems really nice. So I'm going to stick with that idea.
Yeah, a lot of my guests they have their own shows, so I go on their shows. So we kind of do like a double, kind of crossover episodes, and that's a lot of fun too. Like Luke Hobson has been on my show. If you don't know Luke Hobson, What I Wish I Knew Before Becoming an Instructional Designer, that book, and he works at MIT. He does a great podcast, and I find that the guests are now, once you get to a certain point, they start reaching out to you. And they're like, can we come on your show? And then you get a backlog. You also have to deal with that because you become pretty popular in the realm. And you're like, oh my gosh, how do I do this bi-weekly or weekly, or, not posting 2 times a week? And a lot of people just reach out to me and say, hey, this would be a great person for your show. You should really have them on. So that's part of the networking that's so wonderful about the podcasting community.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I grew my podcast one as well, is that people hear you and they recommend people, and then you wind up with a big list of guests. But one more plug I'll put in, if people are concerned about getting guests, is that there actually are online free services where podcast guests and podcast hosts can match up. So you can go into an online database, like I've used Matchmaker.fm, I've used Podmatch. You can go in and look through profiles.
Service for podcasters.
Kind of, yeah. And reach out, because people are receptive. I don't know them, but hey, they have a cool story. They said they want to be on podcasts. So if you literally don't know where to start, that could be a good place to start too.
That's a great idea. Hey, speaking of great ideas, how about if we answer some of the questions in the chat? Because I want to make sure that we get to those. So the one that I saw, Joni, by the way, Joni, you need to publish your podcast. So connect with us and we will bully you into that. But she also asked, can you suggest mics I use a Logitech headset with a mic, but it records a humming sound from my Mac desktop. I've been looking at mics with the stand in front of me with a windscreen. And so there's been lots of suggestions in the chat, but I figured we'll just do a quick round robin here on what we would say. For me, I don't podcast with this. I podcast with this. So it looks fancy. It's not. It's a Blue Yeti that, and I love telling the story because it's sorry, you're going to be jelly, but it's just what it is. It's a Blue Yeti that I bought off of a kid in my daughter's high school class for $40 Starbucks card. So best deal ever. Yeah, love to tell that story. But for the most part, these are like somewhere between $100 and $150, depending on the time of the year. I have I don't know what this thing is, but it's
like a boom. Is that what it's?
I have a windscreen. I finally put it on like this arm that comes off my desk. That's what I use when I podcast. But to address another question I saw down there, I do also wear headphones when I podcast. So a lot of times I'll wear this, put the mic up because I'm not using this mic, I'm using this mic. So that's what I have. My biggest suggestion is you start with what you have, and then don't go out and invest in some big expensive Shure mic because you look at the heads, not like, no, don't do it. If you have a good pair of AirPods or even earbuds that's where I started. I started with earbuds, and then I found this for $40 and couldn't pass it up. So that's what I would say is over the ear headphones, not noise canceling, because you need to be able to hear what's happening, but you also need to be able to focus. And just don't go crazy with the money that you spend on a mic, not right away. Anyways, go ahead. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I bought my mic. It was an ATR 2100 that I bought like about 4 or 5 years ago. So I don't think they make that exact model anymore. They have an equivalent model that worked for me. But one thing, and it was like $60 on sale. So that was enough. It's lasted this long. So, hey, it's been great.
Yeah.
One thing I will say, if people are, there's so many microphones out there. It's like, if you are thinking of buying one, if you don't have something, it's like, what do I buy? And I hope I'm not confusing these two terms, but I would recommend, especially if you don't have a sound treated area, like I don't, I just have like an office with the carpet helps, but it's not like a sound studio. Focus on getting a dynamic mic instead of a condenser mic, because the condenser mic will pick up every single sound in the room. My dynamic mic picks it up right in front of my face. I don't podcast in these. This is just a headset that I have. But if you don't have a sound treated area, go and you are buying a microphone, look at the dynamic ones, at least to start. That's my recommendation.
Yep.
I started out with like a $15 Walmart microphone. And until I knew that the podcast was going to keep going, I did not invest in the Blue Yeti until that happened. And I actually upgraded to the Blue Yeti Pro recently. And I have these headphones, and it's plugged into the mic, so you can hear yourself and you can hear the guests and have it all streamed through there. But it's really nice to kind of hear your intonation and your volume, and you get a feel for how your routine is. So I really love the Blue Yeti for that, and the dynamic nature of it. It's really a great mic, but like we said, don't invest until you know this is something you want to do, because it does, now I have this little, like Betty has, I have a little thing where it's all professional now. Leslie, what are you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say, I already put mine in the chat, but it's basically this little friend right here. And just like Carolyn was saying, this is not a condenser mic. I used to use a condenser mic, but that's why I had to sit in a closet, because it would pick up all the room sound. This one does not. These types of microphones don't usually pick up more than a foot or two away from the front of it. So as long as you're sitting, at a comfortable distance, not too close, because then it'll pick up all, that's why people put screens in front of it, so that you're not like spitting all over it and making all those aspirated sounds. But yeah, and that one I got from Josh. I got that tip from Josh Risser.
Josh Risser, yes.
He has a lot of great tips about voiceover narration, and he recommended that one at a PAX meeting, because I love PAX meetings.
Let me tell you something about Josh Risser. You need to listen to his podcast. It's called DIY Narrator. So do it yourself narrator. Josh Risser could read me the phone book all day long. His voice is like butter. And I have told him this, and he's like, really, Betty? I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, The only thing that's missing is if you had an English accent, then it would probably be perfect. But yeah, he's got some really great tips too. Sorry, I just needed to gush over him for just a second.
Now I learned something new and I have a new podcast to listen to.
Yeah.
What a great day. Sticking with you, Leslie, we want to know, and some questions have come in the chat. How do you get the followers that you have, or the subscribers, or the downloads? What does all that entail? Reaching out to people. How do you do that stuff?
So that is a little bit of magic that I don't really understand, except that, I think, even though now looking back, I'm like, that was kind of crazy. Like the production schedule that I did weekly for like 32 weeks straight. Like the majority of 2020 and well into 2021, I was just cranking out podcast episodes. I don't have children. Let me preface this. I don't have a lot going on, a lot of responsibilities in my house.
Wait a minute. That's a misconception that people that don't have children don't have a lot going on.
Yeah.
Well,
That's right.
I'm just saying, I don't have, the only reason why I could probably keep that up is because I didn't have a lot going on outside of my regular work schedule. But it was exhausting. And but now that I've come into season 2 and I've slowed down and I'm just doing every other week, I think having that bank of episodes, so that when I do get these hard-won new listeners, I'm guessing I pick up 1 to 2 listeners a week. Like, it's not a lot, but those new listeners come in and they have all of these other episodes to listen to, and they're much more likely to become a consistent listener. And then, and if you just keep that snowball rolling, it's a very slow process, but over time it's snowballed. I'm not going to say I have a huge audience. I still don't have a huge audience, but I've seen consistent growth over time. And I'm really I don't enjoy the marketing part of it. I post a graphic on LinkedIn. I'm only posting on LinkedIn, and I only post once a week. So really, I'm only promoting the episode twice before I move on to the next one, because that's all I can handle, personally. Yeah. But it's just slowly snowballs over time. And I think talking about this cross-pollination of having your guests on who maybe also have a following. And so if they come on and they're they have a similar following for whatever their ventures are that they're doing, they might bring in some listeners, and vice versa. If I go on to somebody else's podcast, or like in this webinar that we're doing, might pick up some new members that way. So just kind of like, making yourself show up every now and then in different places, or bringing in people with their own audiences, is probably the best way that I know that takes the least amount of effort to get new listeners.
Right. And it's like, it's not something that happens overnight. I think that you have to be very patient with the process of getting people on downloads. I think that's one of the things I had to tell myself, is like, I'm not going to get 10,000 downloads in 1 year or even 2 years. I have to be very patient. But the people that reach out to you about it and talk to you about how much they like your show, it's kind of like when you're a teacher and the students come back and they say, I just love what you did with this episode. Thank you so much for having this guest. I'm going out and researching blank. That's why we do it. Yep. And I think that's something to be said, is that you do have to be patient with the process and with yourself, because you're not going to become a millionaire overnight. You're not going to become, a Kardashian who has like 42 million followers on Instagram. It just takes patience.
It does. It does. And I'll say I'm coming up on 2 years for If You Ask Betty. I think sometime this month. I should probably know that date. Anyways.
Yeah, we need to celebrate that.
We should celebrate that.
A party.
2 years for If You Ask Betty. In the first year, it took about a year to hit 5,000 total listens. And in the second year, I've tripled that. Like added on triple. So I think that's, 400% growth? I'm not sure. But it's because, I firmly believe it's because what Leslie said is there's this bank of episodes, because I busted my ass. Like I did 52 in a row. That was my goal, was 1 year. I do not recommend that. Don't do that to yourself. Okay. Don't do it, because then you turn what you love to do into a job, don't do that. And so I was able to kind of make some adjustments so it's a little less intense. But yeah, and what happens is people get in there and they're like, a lot of people go and they start at episode 1, but a lot of people don't. They come in and they look for what's interesting and they pick and choose what they want. And I think that's totally fine. And then they go back because they like what you're putting out, but they're like, I want to know more about this and I want to know about that. Oh, look at Heidi. Heidi says it's next Tuesday, February 15th. Oh, I love that she knows that.
Oh my gosh.
Love that she knows that. But yeah, so it's like Leslie said, it's this bank of having these back episodes. So, you gotta wait, you gotta hold keep consistent, whatever your consistent is, and keep doing it, because you're going to hit that growth spurt when you're not even paying attention. And I also just remind myself, like, I'll check every now and then to see the total number of listens I have. And I'm like, wow. I mean, I don't do it for that, but I also do it for that. Like, I don't do it for the numbers, but I do it because I want to see that other people are hearing these great conversations that I'm getting to have. Anything else, Carolyn, as we wrap up this question? And
yeah, everyone's shared. I couldn't share too much beyond that. I would just say to everyone, like, to build on your comment, don't get too hung up or obsessed with your download numbers, because or your Instagram likes or things. Because there are some days where you're going to feel like, I don't think anyone's listening to this at all because I'm not growing as much as I thought I should. But again, it really is, then you get those interactions with people listening out, reaching out to you and saying, like, this episode really made me think differently. It made me do something differently. It meant a lot to me. And that's the qualitative is usually how I measure my growth with that as well.
Yeah.
Agreed. I know we are almost done, but I had one more thought. And somebody, a podcast coach, I did have a podcast coach when I first started, and her message, which I thought was really good, is like, we live in this social media world where, like, our perception of what a realistic audience is sort of distorted. But if instead of imagining like the whole world is my potential audience, if you think, okay, my most recent episode, within the first day, I had 100+ people listen to it. If I imagine, if this is not happening in the internet, but like I went out today and like gave a talk, in live in person, and 100 people showed up, like, I would feel like that's a success,
Yes.
if that number, if you see, I just keep imagining my auditorium is getting fuller and fuller, and like, that's how I measure what's realistic. Like, I can't believe 100 people would come out and hear me talk about, like, like the things that we talk about. And so that's kind of how I keep myself excited and engaged with those numbers, is try to bring them down to like, what's a realistic level for me.
Yes. Wonderful.
I like that a lot. That makes me feel a lot better. So I just want to say thank you to Leslie, Caroline, everybody who's joined us on this live session and talking about L&D, women in podcasting. I think we've learned a ton, and I know there's so much more we could talk about. So we might have to do this again, Betty.
I mean, maybe.
But I really want to plug the She's the First organization. If you haven't had a chance to donate yet, we would love for you to donate to this nonprofit, because you attended this event just to keep education moving forward for women around the world, so we can have events like this and we can have some awesome women in this realm and in society and in cultures across the world. So thank you so much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you very much. Watch for the recording and the publication of the panelists' full answers. If you haven't already, please follow all of us on LinkedIn for sure, and any other social media that you might find yourself at. Thanks a lot, you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.